Hi there. My name is Lucas Weiss, and I am the host of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles. For today's episode, I'm joined by Sean Martin. Sean is the senior digital editor at PGAtour.com. In this episode, I chat with Sean about the return to golf, the challenges of being a golf reporter during the pandemic, as well as how he got into the sport, the advantages of going to a smaller school to learn journalism, as well as his proudest journalistic accomplishments in the sport of golf. The Weesports Quarantine Chronicles is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to all three of those channels. This is episode 29 of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. All right, on today's episode of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, I am joined by Sean Martin. He is a senior editor at PGAtour.com. Sean, welcome to the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. I mean, you're my first golf journalist, so congrats for that honor. And you're someone that's I look up to. You've done a lot in the golf industry, but before
I beat Bob Weeks.
True. Well, yes, Bob. Of course, Bob. Tied with Bob. And Lauren Rubenstein, who I'm sure you may know from Canada. So you guys are the top three. But before we get into your career, the last couple weekends we've had live golf. I know it's not PGA Tour golf, but the fact that we've had back-to-back weeks of exhibition golf, I'm just curious if you watched and some of your thoughts on what you saw.
Yeah, I think it was great. I mean, even from a professional standpoint, just having something to write about, we've been kind of squeezing the last drops of juice out of the lemon. I feel like trying to make some content, write some stories, that kind of stuff. So it's nice just to have golf again. I think it's nice to know it's possible. A lot of places golf stayed open. I think people realize that golf can be played when the right steps are taken. I think that I feel like the tenor has changed around the PGA Tour coming back. I think when the plan was first announced, I think a lot of people were very skeptical. I think the more we find out about, the virus and how it's transmitted and what it's like outdoors, I feel like more people, feel like it's feasible and doable. I feel like there's been less skepticism about the ability and responsibility of golf to get out there. So I hope that, that we can do it. I think we can. I think it can come off well. The last two weekends, I think were great. You had kind of your golf hardcore audience. Seminole with, those four guys is great for your hardcore fan. So many people were just excited to see Seminole. It's kind of up there with Augusta and Pine Valley as far as, courses with a mystique. And of course, Augusta we see every year, Pine Valley we don't. So that was one I know people were very excited to see. And then, Ricky, Rory, Dustin, Matthew Wolff are names that golf fans know. But then when you get Tiger, Phil, Tom, and Peyton, those are names that transcend sports. And so that was such a totally different environment, appeal to a totally different audience, while I think appealing to the golf audience, which I thought was really cool. I think, most of the people I follow are golf people online and, your hardcore golf fans, golf media. And so you kind of knew that Seminole would be what they were into, but, you never know with the Tiger Phil thing. The first one probably didn't quite live up to the expectations. I think even Phil admitted that, just that they both kind of clammed up. There wasn't the discourse you wanted. There wasn't the, needle sticking that you wanted. So I think people kind of came in skeptical and right away and nailed it. I think the rain helped. Guys are grinding out in the rain. And so it was cool that you had two totally different events, both raised money for charity and both just attracted appealed to a wide spectrum of golf fans.
No, for sure. And I think, you make the point about, raising money for charity, and both events did that. The first raising over $5 million, the second $20 million. And you're right. For me, I've heard of Seminole, and so seeing that on TV for the first time was really unique. And then, of course, just the entertainment of the banter back and forth of last weekend with Tiger, Phil, Tom, and Peyton was entertaining. But from a broadcast perspective, Sean, because I think, this is sort of the challenges that many of these, networks are probably going to have to face with the PGA Tour starting up. in the summer is, just sort of the things that you saw from a broadcast perspective. I know that the first event did remote, production and reporting. The second event, you had like a tent where, the barricades separated the broadcasters. But overall, it just seemed like, the golfers plus reporters, they were adhering to social distancing, and it'll be interesting to see if some of those components will be implemented for future tournaments this year.
Yeah, I think that the big difference, I think, was with the Seminole match versus medalist. I think the players having the IFBs, having the mics to hear the announcers was a great dynamic, because you could have that interplay between announcer and player. I don't think we're going to see that at a PGA Tour event anytime soon, but I think for future televised exhibitions, I think it's the way to go. Just because I think the announcers can lead the players. They can ask them questions. If Rory hits a shot, you can remind him, like, hey, Rory, walk me through that shot. Whereas if he's just got a mic on, he's kind of just ambling down the fairway, talking to Dustin maybe. So I think that's huge for the future of televised exhibitions. It'll be interesting that the first 4 events with, no on-site spectators. I'm wondering if we can get that really clear player caddy audio. I know on the tee, you've got a mic right there next to the marker, and now you've got no players there or no fans there making noise. So I would think that we'll be able to get some really good player caddy audio, and probably have to lean heavily on that. The downside in the fairway, I don't know how close people are going to get, how long of an arm you have on the mic to try to get it close enough, how close players are comfortable with people being. So we'll have to feel that out. But I know I haven't watched the Bundesliga yet. It's not on my sporting calendar really, but people have said that with no, empty stadiums, you can hear everything. And so a golf course is usually pretty quiet, but I do think that with no on-site spectators, I think the one benefit is the potential to get really clear player caddy audio.
No, for sure, and it'll be interesting to see what unfolds as the PGA Tour gets back up and running next month. But Sean, I want to get into your career, and you wrote a piece in February about Westlake Golf Course, and when reading this piece, it sort of resonated with me, because I feel like with a lot of golf fans and journalists, they have that, moment in their childhood, and they connect it with a particular golf course, and you with Westlake. So I'm just curious about how Westlake shaped your love of the game of golf.
Yeah. So for those who haven't read it, they may have seen Westlake on Instagram, on George Ganks's Instagram. If you're on Instagram and you're a golf fan, you probably have, because George has a huge following. But it's a 5,000-yard golf course, par 67. The mat, or the range, is off artificial turf mats. It's a real basic golf course. Most of the par 4s are drivable, and so it's nothing special as a golf course. But I started playing because we moved to California when I was 12, and the kids I became friends with during the school year, like when summer came, my mom just asked them, what do kids around here do in the summer? Because we're new here and got to find something to do. And they all did this junior program at Westlake that was super affordable. I think it was $100 for a session, 2 sessions a summer. And that got you group lessons every week, and that got you a tournament every week. And then when you passed the rules and etiquette test, you got a $6 greens fee for the year. So that's how I got started in golf. My parents don't play, so I had no other background in golf. And it was a great place of just, there were rules, and if you, were goofing off or, disrupting other customers, like they would put you in line and tell you you've gone too far. But for the most part, like, they were totally comfortable with kids running around and having chipping contests and putting contests. And I remember the chipping contest, or the chipping green, was situated so that if you were hitting like a 30-yard chip and you shanked it, like it was firing through the putting green between people's legs. And that would happen occasionally, but you said sorry, you picked up your ball, and people were fine with it. And it was a place that, like, my parents would drop me off before I had a car, and they'd come back hours later, and the golf course was cool with kids just being around playing. And so I think that just allowed me to fall in love with the game. Just, it made it affordable, made it accessible. and then just so many kids there that you just made friends there. Most of the people I still keep in touch with from back home are people I knew at the golf course, not necessarily people in high school. And so you just had great friendships, and then you just, you didn't really think about how much time you were spending there. You were just hanging out with your friends and playing some golf.
Did you have any memorable rounds, memorable shots that come to mind? I know you just mentioned that chip shot, but I mean, did you have any memorable moments from Westlake?
Yeah, I mean, one of my buddies and I still joke about it. They had a junior club championship, and it was 2 9-hole rounds. And so they did over 2 consecutive weekdays, or 2 weeks on a weekday. And the second week I was going to Oklahoma to visit my aunt and uncle. So they let me play it like each round a week early. So they were having like a 4-ball tournament, that week, let's say, and I played my first round, and I played my second round when the rest of the kids were playing their first round, and I broke par for the first time. And I was like, I have a clubhouse lead for a week. I'm pretty excited. I'm sitting pretty well. And it must have been over email or like AOL Instant Messenger, because this is before the time of like widespread smartphones. But somebody told me that my buddy Doug had holed like a 40-footer on the last hole to beat me by 1, and take the title from me. So we still remember that. We still joke about it. I don't know why they let me play a week early, but they were kind enough to do it. But so that, I guess, was a dagger and a tough loss.
Fair enough, but at least you've recovered and you're now covering the game.
Yes.
So you may have the last laugh after all. But you attended Cal Polytechnic State, and I've had some guests on here who, they've gone to Syracuse, they've gone to Northwestern for journalism, and to use sort of the March Madness analogy, you're like the 14th, 15th seed that have gone on.
Cal Poly made the tournament once. We played the play-in game, so we were a 16 seed.
So like first 4.
I get your metaphor.
Yeah. Fair enough, but the fact that you went to a smaller school that wasn't like one of the top journalism programs in the country, how did that shape your experience to want to get into sports journalism?
Yeah, it was intentional. It was more also, it just so happened also they had a golf team that I could play for. My second school was UCLA, and there was no way I was going to play golf there. So that played a little role in it. But, when I still remember freshman year, my first journalism class, let's just call it Journalism 101, kids had written for their high school paper, which I went to a smaller high school. We didn't have that. Kids had written for their town paper, covering other high school sports, high school football. So like all these other kids in my class had been published, or not all of them, but a lot of them had attended summer journalism camps even. And so, I had done nothing. I think I had been an editor on the school yearbook, but I played golf all the time. And so I remember just being so nervous and feeling so out of place and so far behind. And I think that especially if I'd been somewhere like UCLA, you would have been down at the bottom of the ladder in both cases, but it was a much taller ladder at UCLA. So it just allowed me to, not get lost in the shuffle. When it came to the school paper, our journalism department was small enough that you could write on the school paper, I think, starting your sophomore year. And all you had to have done is basically finished your first year. I was the sports editor my junior year, which, again, much more competitive at a place like UCLA or Syracuse or, of course, Northwestern. The town paper was a 40,000 circulation paper. I covered high school football for them, did Agate, which people may not remember that. It's the pages with all the stats on them in newspapers. Those are long gone. And so I could do all these things because we were a small town. The town is like 60,000 people total, and that includes the college students. It was a smaller program. It was much more hands-on. And I think I knew I needed that because I had no journalism experience going into college. But so it just let me write. I remember covering a Cal Poly basketball game, and it was against Cal State Northridge, and the woman next to me worked for the Daily News in Los Angeles, and she later became a contact when I went to work for the Daily News. So that helped me. So even just being able to cover Cal Poly sports exposed me to other writers. I feel like the industry has changed a little bit in that I graduated high school in 2000, college in 2004, and it was still kind of you started a small paper, and just keep moving up the, the circulation ranks. You go from a 10,000 paper to a 25,000, 50,000 circulation paper, and then to a metropolitan. And I think with so few jobs available, it's hard to make that move now. And so I do think that there are benefits to the bigger school, getting the internship at a large, the largest publication you can, just because there are so few jobs that it's just hard to make that progression up the newspaper ladder. And then on the flip side too, the benefit now also is you can just kind of make your own media.
Yeah.
I think like what you're doing. I mean, you look at No Laying Up.
Yep.
It's an extreme example. They've been very successful. They're the outlier, but I mean, they made their own path. And so I think even, especially now with the job market the way it is, especially where we're headed, probably with, slow times economically, focusing your expert or your time and expertise into creating your own content that you can show to someone, this is what I did. That's kind of like in the back when I was applying for jobs, you had clippings, and there's literally the clippings out of the newspaper that you'd written and you Xeroxed them, you sent them off. And now it's, hey, here's a link to my website. Here's my podcast. Here's my Twitter feed, my Instagram feed. So it's definitely, I think, changed a lot in those 15, 20 years or so, that I would probably recommend people go to a larger school now. I think it would be harder to do it out of like a Cal Poly. So I don't know that I would follow the same path I did per se. But I think too, I'm really big on people studying something other than journalism. I always, Jim Murray, the great Los Angeles Times columnist, studied history. And I do think, not to downplay a journalism education, I mean, I learned a lot from it, but it's always the great Bobby Knight quote that, I think most people learn to write in third grade and then they move on to something else. I think there's so much value in expertise now that it's better if you develop that expertise, your niche, and then you need to have the writing skills to back it up. But also, I think when you have, I'd rather see someone who is the best in their niche than kind of the 500th person trying to do the same thing. And whether that's, learning at least a basic handle of data and analytics, depending on what sport you want to get into, or having a really good grasp on history of the sport so you can kind of put things into great context. So much is done with behavioral economics and social sciences, of being able to apply that to sports, kind of like the Malcolm Gladwell Moneyball effect. I just think having some of those expertise can help, separate you from the rest.
Malcolm Gladwell, fun fact, he's Canadian, so
Yeah.
shout out there. So thanks for the Canadian shout out.
Hates golf too, as we all know.
which is awesome. But you mentioned that, finding that niche, and I think that's so critical, because I think for a lot of young journalists and writers starting out, I mean, you want to sort of, dip your feet into different areas. You may want to cover basketball, you want to cover baseball or other sports, but I think for you, what you've done so well is like you've occupied the golf space, and with many other golf journalists, but like that's your focus. Like you've specialized and also integrated a lot of statistics into golf as well. Like, seeing your Twitter account, I mean, you throw out a lot of really unique and fun stats for followers to look at. But I also think too, Sean, and maybe you can comment on this, like the fact that you went to a smaller school. Now, granted, today, different times, but the fact that you were able to get those reps and, cover, Cal Polytech sports and, be able to, get those opportunities served you well compared to going to, a reputable program where, like you said, you're one of 500 trying to get so few jobs. You're at a school where you're occupying the space because there's you're the guy there.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I do look back. I can still remember some of the bad leads I wrote. I have a lot of my clippings, so I have a lot of those bad leads. So there is a lot to be said for reps. I still feel like I'm learning about writing, and I still feel like I could write better. So I definitely I don't discount that. I might be speaking out of both sides of my mouth, but yeah, I think the beauty now too is you can kind of get those reps on your own. And even I remember I had an old book. It was like the AP Guide to Sports Writing, and it was like a made for college kids who were just starting out. And I mean, I never did it, but I remember it said literally just watch a game and write an article on it, and then compare what you see, from professional writers. And so it is good to get them published, but too, you can get reps those ways as well. And I think the reps are super important.
So Sean, you mentioned that you went to the Daily News, but how do you end up at Golf Week, where you spent many years before, your current role at the PGA Tour.com?
Yeah, this is a story I like to tell people, especially if they're aspiring journalists or whatnot, because I luckily don't have to deal with it, but I mean, I understand the state of the job market right now in journalism. So Golf Week, I was introduced to it at Westlake because it was in the pro shop. It used to be in tons of pro shops, and it would just sit there. It was a portrait style magazine. It was 11 by 18, or it was large. It was I forget what it was called, but it was tabloid is what the word I'm looking for. It was tabloid style. So it was a big magazine, and it was just early days of the internet. So the scoreboard section was huge. So it would have scores from every tournament because you couldn't go online and find them easily. So that was where you got your scores from random amateur and junior events in some other state. And so I used to look at it because I really wanted to play college golf. And so I wanted to see what people were shooting in college and other high school kids. And so I used to look at Golf Week all the time. And I got introduced to it that way. And I just loved it. It was just a great magazine for hardcore golf fans. And going into college, like my two loves were golf and baseball. And I made that decision to follow golf writing. There's so many fewer people who want to be golf writers than baseball writers, then my odds are just better. Plus I played golf. I had stopped playing baseball a long time ago, so I knew golf better as a sport. But in college, I just recognized that that's where I wanted to work. And so I would send emails to them inquiring about internships, asking for advice, asking if I could freelance events for them that were in California. And I emailed them a lot, and they would email me back. I always tell people, I'm like, find someone that you want to connect with, whose work you appreciate, because often they will write back because somewhere along the lines, they had someone who helped them along the way. And so they're willing to return the favor and then respond. So even people you think might not respond to you because they're some, big name or whatever, often will. And so I would just bombard Golf Week with emails. And finally, I got an email that said they had a job opening and they were only opening it to people who had contacted them about jobs in the past because they wanted to limit their search. And so I did that. I applied. I got the job. And then, they told me they used to make jokes, and I would send another email in the office. It was like, oh, it's another email from this kid. But at the same time, that's also what they said they respected and why they wanted to hire me, because they knew that I really wanted to work there and that I was very passionate about not just getting a job, but getting that job and working there. So that's always my advice for people who are looking for jobs.
No, that's amazing advice, because you can't, you got to reward that hustle eventually. And I know that a lot of young journalists and reporters, whether you're pitching stories for freelance or sending out your demo reel, you're going to get a lot of no's, but eventually, you're going to get, that yes. And you look at somewhere like Golf Week where, you just be, showing that polite persistence. Hey, you got a job and your career started. So, which is pretty amazing. And one of the stories, Sean, that I, when looking and doing some research for this interview, you wrote a piece on Tom Whitney from Air Force. It was back in September 17th, 2009 for Golf Week. I don't know if you remember, but
so he was still in college, I want to say.
Yeah. So the title of the piece is Air Force's Tom Whitney on Final Flyby. And it's just a beautifully written piece because, you throw in a lot of these, flight metaphors and, and whatnot. But I'm just curious for you covering amateur or college golf and how that made you a better golf journalist, because it sort of resonates with me covering, let's say, junior hockey here in Canada, where it's a very niche following. And if you can really write good pieces on, these lesser known names or this category of the sport, you can occupy that space and get a lot more credibility.
I think so, and I think you'll get more visibility. You might have less traffic, but let's say a more engaged audience. Um, so yeah, I think college and amateur golf, the biggest thing too now in my current role was getting to know those guys back when they were kids, and frankly, they were excited about being interviewed by a journalist. And it pays off now because now they're tour players, and not that I get crazy special access, but it just helps the interview when they know who you are, they know where you're coming from, they know they can trust you, they know that you'll understand what they're saying, you're not going to twist it into some weird way, you're not going to take it out of context. So that definitely helps, and I do think that so often in journalism we get stuck on engagements, on the numbers, and I get it. They're easy to look at, they're objective, they can easily be measured. You can measure, how they've changed over periods of time. But I think that discounts and doesn't give enough credit to the engagement of the audience, because you can write the same story off of a Tiger Woods Twitter post about him returning to play as everyone else, and it'll probably get the most traffic, but it's not going to make you stand out from the crowd. I mean, there's only so much you can do with that. As far as a story, whereas junior hockey, junior golf, an in-depth profile on someone, you might get fewer views, fewer clicks, but the people that read it are probably really invested into the sport if they're reading it at that level, and then because you're covering something that no one else is, that helps you stand out. That's always kind of been my gist. When I was at the Daily News, like I covered track and field because I'm a runner as well, not like Malcolm Gladwell, but I also enjoy that. And then also I was like a kid just starting out, and I was interviewing Olympians because track and field, and same with beach volleyball, which was a sort of random assignment, but same thing with talking to Olympians because they just appreciate the coverage. And so, whereas if I was trying to be the fourth guy on the Dodgers beat, who knows what I'd be doing, or just writing small little notebook items that anyone can kind of do. So I've always tried to kind of cover some, I don't want to say random, but just kind of go off the beaten path, because I think you can stand out there. I always say that there's reporters and there's kind of pontificators, and it sounds like a dig, and it's not, but like at Golf Week, we had a guy whose job was no matter what Tiger shot, he had to write Tiger that day. And he's a very creative writer, a very good columnist, but especially back 2006, 2007, 2008, at the height of Tiger, you're not getting a lot. And so you have to be creative. There's not a lot of new information you're giving people, so you have to write creatively, which is a challenge in itself, and you have to write in an entertaining manner. But I just didn't have really any desire to do that and write, fight with 50 other journalists over the pickings of a Tiger interview back in 2008, because there just wasn't much there. I'd rather write some random story that tells someone something new. And there's room for both. That was just my personal preference. I like information. I like learning something when I read something. I've grown more of an appreciation for being entertained when I read, and I've seen kind of the joy of reading a well-written piece that might not teach you anything new, but just it was written in an entertaining manner. On The Athletic, I've been reading Joe Posnanski's Baseball 100, and it's informative as well. I don't want to say it's not, but even when you read stuff that you already know, it's so well written, or makes you think about things in a different way, or puts things in a different context, that even if the facts aren't new, it's still an entertaining read. But yeah, my gist has always just kind of been informing people, and sometimes informing people about very random stuff that very few care about, but someone does.
No, I mean, and that's so important, because I think, so many people, I think early on, they're drawn to that big assignment. In golf, it's, whether it's the Masters or the US Open, or drawn to a particular athlete, like, you mentioned Tiger Woods, but sometimes the better writing and the better journalist is the one that, they may go to a lesser known event one week to cover a certain golfer because it's a really unique story, or they write stories on the Corn Ferry Tour or the Mackenzie Tour here in Canada to get their feet wet, and just to show that you're willing to get those reps to become a better golf writer and a golf journalist.
Yeah,
and
totally. And I think too, when you're starting out, it's just hard to get access to players of a higher stature.
No, for sure. No, that's so true. But Sean, I want to shift gears to, covering golf because, at PGAtour.com, that's, you're covering more on the PGA Tour level now. And I think for a lot of journalists and writers who are listening to this, who are used to, let's say, covering a basketball game or a hockey game, covering a golf tournament is very unique because it's a week-long event. Because now, obviously, the tournament's 4 days, Thursday to Sunday, but many of the journalists, of course, get there earlier in the week. So I'm just curious for you, maybe walk me through the coverage of, let's say, the Tour Championship and what that week, is like for you at PGAtour.com each and every day leading to the, from start to finish.
Yeah. And it's changed even. I remember when I started at Golf Week with like majors, we would probably travel Tuesday, maybe stop at the golf course Tuesday afternoon, and then bulk of the work was Wednesday. This is like 06, 07. Internet was not the priority it is now. I mean, I've always heard a story from the 03 US Open, because back in the day, back then, the guys at Golf Week only really were responsible for Sunday night writing about what had happened in the tournament. So Thursday even wasn't that important. So a bunch of guys from Golf Week went out and played golf Thursday morning because it didn't really matter. They had 3 more rounds to go, and they'd read about what happened in the end. And so Tom Watson ends up leading that day. He's 53 years old. Bruce Edwards, his caddy, is pretty severely impacted with ALS. I think Watson holed out for eagle on one of the holes, I want to say. Shoots 65. So it's it's a huge story. And so these guys went and played golf, and they come back to the house they were renting in the evening, and they kind of made the low man on the totem pole go to the tournament. And they're like, oh, who's leading? And he's like, Tom Watson. And they're like, shut up. And they're like, no, Tom Watson's. But the whole point of that is not to knock on anyone. It's to illustrate how things have changed. I mean, you used to get to an event Wednesday. Now, most time you're rolling in the media center Monday at a major, which can make for a long week just because by even end of Tuesday, you're like, can we just get this thing started already? You've asked everyone you need to ask about the course conditions and what the winning score is going to be. And, everyone's pontificated on who's going to win and whatnot. But you also need to feed the beast and need content because people want to read about stuff from a major. I do think a lot of times with big events, we have a lot of our preview content done well ahead of time. It's much easier, especially if you want to do a sit down with like a defending champion or some other big name going into a major. It's much easier to get even a little bit of time with them and ask them several questions about something weeks in advance than at a press conference where you maybe get one follow-up. So most of our preview content is done well in advance, and we're just kind of there either with some last minute questions or just to kind of, in case someone says something crazy or newsworthy, I should say. So yeah, that's the biggest way things have changed. And then I think each day it is kind of covering. I mean, it is kind of funny because really by the end of Thursday, you've only played the first quarter of the game, if you will. But, people still want to know what's happened, and that's the results that are going to stand for another 12, 18 hours or so and they're going to stand overnight because you're done for the day. And then too, I mean, often it's the first round leader. I hate covering first round leaders on Thursday because it's the kind of most meaningless thing usually. Just you see so many guys take a first round lead and finish T47. So people care usually more about, well, if Tiger's in the field, whatever Tiger shoot doesn't matter. But trying to find some sort of theme and not just write so-and-so shot this and so-and-so shot this, but finding a greater theme to kind of encapsulate what happened that day.
And I find too, Sean, in covering golf tournaments as well, because when you cover a game, it's just the game, right? Now, of course, if you cover the team the whole season, there's many games, but it becomes, relatively, the same, if you will, process. But I just think with golf, the essential for golf media, I find, is like, you can get that inside the ropes pass, you can walk with a certain group, see what the course layout is. But then you have the benefit, unlike spectators, to then go back to the media center where you're like watch it like at home on TV, where you get all those various angles and you can follow what's going on, and then you can then decide, okay, if this golfer's, making a charge, let's go follow him. Or if this story makes perfect sense, we'll focus on that. Do you find like there's more options for you as a golf journalist, just, in terms of what to talk about in terms of content production during the tournament?
Yeah, I think that, it's the old school part of me says always walk. You're there for a reason. Your company paid your flight and hotel for you to be there. You should be walking. The hard part is unless if you're assigned to one specific player, like let's say you're on the Tiger beat for the day, then yeah, that makes 100% sense. But especially at Augusta where phones aren't allowed on the golf course, or even other places where a lot of times because of the number of people, there's no cell service. If you head out there and you end up following the wrong group, if it's a tight Sunday, the person at home knows more than you do because they've seen all the shots, they've seen everything replayed. If like the Pebble Beach U.S. Open last year is a perfect example. If you followed Brooks Koepka the entire time, you don't really know what Gary Woodland did. And if your job is to cover the end result, that's a tough place to be in. You can kind of try to catch up on, and you do try to check your phone when you're out there on Twitter to be up to date on what's going on. And you can catch up later. There are video highlights. So if you need to see anything, you'll be able to see it. But I try to walk whenever possible, but you just, depending on what your assignment for the day is, you do have to be careful about when you head out there and when you stay in the media center. Because there you do have, multiple channels usually. You have the broadcast, you've got whatever streaming, and then you've got access to the stats, you've got access to the internet, which is a big help. So it's a tougher decision than it would seem.
I want to talk about two majors that you've covered, and the first being the 2008 U.S. Open, which you say was the best major that you've covered, from the research that I did, and it's obviously last year Tiger winning the Masters. Now many people talk about that being one of his greatest achievements given the comeback. But I look back at that 2008 U.S. Open, Sean, and that was incredible. Tiger won a major on one leg. And the fact that he scrambled around Torrey Pines, when he should have made double bogey, ends up making birdie or par. He makes that putt on the 72nd hole just to get into a playoff with Rocco Mediate. And oh wait, we're still on the Monday U.S. Open 18-hole playoff. They play a full 18 and they have to play then extra holes. I don't know, Sean. Like, it just doesn't feel like it was an unbelievable accomplishment, and I just wish it just got more respect than it does, I feel.
Then I shouldn't tell you that I left like after 9 holes of the playoff. So because at Golf Week, we had our issue, usually you finish up the issue Monday morning. We obviously held it for the playoff, but we had like 6 people there. And you only needed really 2 people to cover it. And I had a flight to Alaska, and I was meeting a buddy there, and they were like, look, we don't need you. We have other people. We've got our Tiger guy. We only really have room for like one story because we have really tight deadlines, because not only is it finishing on Monday, it's on the West Coast. So I just went ahead and left, and one of our writers was friends with Rocco's agent, and he was staying at the Torrey Pines Hilton, which is right outside the gates. And so he said, I'll take your bag over for you. Long story short, they couldn't find me the hotel. I kept walking back and forth between going back into the tournament to the hotel. There's no cell service. I can't get a hold of anyone. I'm trying to find my bag. My plane's leaving. I finally head to the airport without my bag. The hotel calls me. They've got my bag. All this is like back 9 in the playoff.
Yeah.
So I'm through security. I was going to fly to Alaska with no bag, no clothes. And then I go out of security and they get it to me. Someone drove it down from the hotel, and I'm sweating bullets because there's a long line of people leaving Torrey Pines because they're leaving Monday as well because their plane flights were for Monday. I thought I was going to barely make my flight, and then I run to the gate and it's delayed 2 hours. And then I somehow got roped into a radio interview, and guys asking me like, well, isn't it amazing how it finished? And I have no idea how it finished. So I'm just like, yeah, Tiger just did what Tiger always does, not knowing what had actually happened, but that got me away with it. So yeah, I tell that story not often, but I was gone for the second 9 of that playoff.
That's a really unique story, but funny story, because I mean, everyone's you don't know what other journalists are doing. You think a lot of people are still there, but you're right. I mean, it's that Monday. People have flights booked before, so you don't expect not a playoffs. Oh, but that's unique.
And you talk about inside the ropes, especially golf week, we used to travel, let's say 6 people to a major because we had to fill a magazine. So we needed a lot of writers there, but you might get 2 inside the ropes passes. So there's 4 of you with no inside the ropes access. And if you're, sometimes it worked for me, I was covering amateurs. So I'd go follow some random amateur and there's 5 people in the gallery and it's fine. But you're not covering Tiger at a major from outside the ropes. That's when it is better to be in the media center because it's just impossible to see anything.
And then last year, Sean, Open Championship in Northern Ireland. You're in a pub covering Shane Lowry's historic victory. What was that experience like? Because from Twitter, it looked wild.
It was crazy. It really started the night before. He shoots, I want to say he shot 63 with a great back 9. And so you've got 18 greens surrounded by grandstands, and then they take you through kind of you walk on a raised walkway, and that goes to the media area where, you do TV interviews, and then you meet with the media before you go into the interview room. And I mean, there's a white picket fence basically that's separating the interview area from the fans, and it's probably 10 feet tall, but I mean, people are on shoulders over, looking over the fence. They're hanging Irish flags or singing songs. Like, I mean, it sounded like the guy had won the thing, and it's only Saturday, and we know anything can happen the next day. And so you could just see, I mean, it was crazy. And because it's you're not far from his home. It's the Open Championship, so it's the biggest event on their calendar. And so actually I was writing the story, and for background, I just kind of, went to Google Maps to see how far his hometown actually was from here so I could write how many miles it was. And I'm like, man, it's only 4 hours from here. And, access is limited. I think we only had 1 inside the ropes pass for 3 of us. So only 1 of us could really follow it from inside the ropes. So probably the other 2 of us are going to be watching it from the media center. And I was like, we should just go. And so I called at probably 9 p.m. and someone answered. I called the clubhouse, and the guy was really friendly, super friendly. He said, yeah, come, we'd love to have you. Come on down. Sure. And it kind of felt like it would be a story either way, because I think his lead was 4 shots. So if he won, there'd obviously be jubilation. And if he lost, there would be heartbreak of him blowing a large lead. So we just decided to do it. So myself and our photographer, Kayer, we drove down that morning. It so happened that Michael Bamberger had the same idea. So I was flattered that I had the same idea as Michael Bamberger because he's a legend. And it was a small little course. It was owned by a couple brothers and another friend. It had been farmland, and then 20 years ago they turned it into a golf course. It had been through some tough times with the 2008 recession. And it turned out the guy who I had talked to on the phone the night before basically runs the place, and it's his labor of love. And the reason he'd answered at 9 p.m. is that he gets the phone calls from the clubhouse forwarded to his cell phone, so he never misses a call. And so it was just this cool story of this. I mean, it's a little town in rural Ireland. They've all known Shane since he was, 10. They all had stories about playing with him when he was a teenager, and, incredible shots that he hit when he was, that age. And it was a great perspective. We've talked about whether we should do it again with other majors, and I was like, it might be the only time it really works, because it's the Open Championship, and you're in Ireland, so it's their biggest event. It's a small club where everyone knew the player, and his parents still go to that golf course, still eat dinner there, still play there. So there's a real community connection. So all of that just kind of worked out so well.
Last question for you, Sean, and it has to sort of do with, obviously we talked about with, the PGA Tour, getting back up again in June, but I feel like in media in general, like it's just going to be a new normal that many journalists and media companies have to navigate through. But I'm just curious how will your job or the job of golf media change as the PGA Tour comes back? Like, do you see any differences, or do you feel like it will be business as usual as it was back in January, February?
No, I mean, I think it'll be drastically different. I don't know if the tours announced what they're doing, but I mean, obviously, even some companies, they've said they're not going to send people because they're not letting employees travel because of concerns or liability or those kinds of things. So even when media centers open up to full strength, there may not be some companies there just because they have decided it's not worth it. Then you throw in a tough economic environment where people are trying to cut costs. That's going to cut back on travel. Then you throw in players, concerned for their own health and wanting to keep distance, so they may be hesitant to speak to media. It's just like I think all of us have felt with all of our relationships. There's a greater distance between people. There's the 6 feet, or I believe it's 6 meters where you are. No, that'd be too far. But anyways, it's different in different places. But there is that just greater distance, and I think there has been a growing distance between players and media in all sports for a long time, especially because as more media gets involved, and not just more print media, but if you look at a professional athlete now, they have their traditional media demands, they have their sponsors' media demands, producing social media, whatnot for their sponsors. They have, league social media, team social media. They just have so many more demands that all get kind of lumped under media demands, that the traditional sitting down for an interview, instead of being the one thing they kind of had to do, is just one part of, many. They've got to, do interviews for TV partners. And so player access always, I think, continues to dwindle because now there's just so many content mouths to feed, if you will. And so you throw that in with probably fewer media on site, and then concerns about speaking in front of large groups of people. I think there will be a further distance between media and player in not just golf, but a lot of sports. And that's one reason I think that I've gotten so into the stats and the history, is that I've found as access to players goes away, we need to be able to better put these things in context, because you're not going to be able to rely on the players as much for, let's say, a colorful quote or for some insight into their round, or so you're going to have to produce that yourself. And so through statistics, through knowing the history of the game, you can do that instead of relying on the player to provide you the great quote, let's say. So I think that I was talking to someone today. I remember that before Major League Baseball shut down spring training, they had barred barred media from the clubhouse. I think the NHL had done the same. And a lot of writers had written columns saying that this is why clubhouse access is important, even if you don't think it is. And there's also a good chance that once this gets taken away, it won't be given back. And, that is I think that is a reality with a lot of aspects of this, is that, things that get taken away because of the situation we're in now, there's no guarantee we're going to get them back. And so I think that's where we also need to be careful. But yeah, I think this will be a permanent change in the player media relationship, I guess. I also do wonder, with more people working from home, more liberty probably to stream things, I think more people will be watching things like PGA Tour Live or Golf Channel. And so at the end of the day, as originally a print person who's hopefully trying to do more and different things and tell stories in a different way, it's just harder and harder for the print person to bring something new to the fan, and they have to work harder and harder to do it, because odds are whatever was worth covering, they've seen it either live streamed or they've seen it on social media. They've seen the video highlight. Newspaper writers in days of Grantland Rice were crucial because you had no idea what happened. Or even I remember I was telling people when I was in high school, PGA Tour was on USA Network here for, let's say, 2 hours on a Thursday afternoon. And once the telecast went off, you didn't know what the scores were after that until the newspaper came out the next morning. Now, literally everything is streamed. So Tiger, you can see every one of Tiger Woods' shots. So for the media person to tell you something new and make it worthwhile from a written standpoint is so much harder than ever.
Interesting perspective as always. Sean Martin, he is a senior editor at PGAtour.com. Sean, thank you for joining me today on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles.
Yeah, thanks for having me.